Okay, so we left off at a point where we knew what the two currencies were, and we were getting ready to set up the API call. So if you go back to your code, you will see that, for example, I have the last one was to go from GBP, British pound, to Canadian dollar. And what we had from our search before, we had this page open which tells us the rate. And to go from British pound to Canadian dollar, we need to say base is equal to GBP and symbols is equal to CAD. And then it tells me base GBP. And so 1 British pound is 1.62 Canadian. This is what it will tell us. This is the URL. So given those two currency names, we need to build this URL. So what do we need? We need this part of the URL. And then the rest we will add ourselves. So highlight that up to the question mark, including the question mark, and copy it. So in here, update exchange rate. In the model, first of all, the string that we just copied, we'll save it as the base URL for the API and put it in the model. So we have it available. And then to it, we need to add these two currencies, from and to. So here is how we'll do it. So we'll declare another variable, API URL, and that is going to be concatenation of the base URL and those two parameters, these two, base, currency, and the symbols. So we'll add those here. So base will be the from currency and symbol. So make sure you're typing it properly. You've got a question mark in your base URL here at the end, and you're typing the equal to sign after the base to assign the value, and then and symbols equal to currency. So this gives us the URL that we need to open through a network call. We can test it. At this point, I would like you to actually test it. Just print the API URL that you have just built and run it, make some changes, and then whatever you get as the URL, open it in your browser. So let's say we go from CAD to USD to INR. So this is the URL. It's printed in the debug window. Okay. So whatever you see in your debug window, copy it. And that when you paste in your browser, it should give a valid result. Otherwise, you have a problem. So everybody able to open the URL that you see? If it's not opening, if it's giving you page not found or something, then just double check what you have as the URL. Okay, so now what do? We have a URL which opens in the browser. Now what we want to do is we want to take this. We are storing it as a string right now. So I've got a URL as a string. It's called API URL. What I want to do with this is, just like in any other language, in Java, what you will most likely do is you will create a URL object. And then you will open a connection on it. In Swift, it's called a session. You'll open a session. The session gets created. You will instantiate a session. But what it does is it just sets it up. then you have to run that session using a data task. In Swift, this is the terminology, data task. And this data task is what gives us whatever that URL is going to return. So that's what we are going to do now. This is the process we will follow. And what happens is that when we have a string representation of a URL, a string accepts anything that's a valid string. But it's not necessary that all strings can be converted to a URL. So the URL function could return, the initializer could return nil. That's why what we need to do is we are going to embed it in an if block. So we'll say let URL is equal to URL. So this is the URL object. And as soon as you say open brackets, it will give you all possible ways to create the URL object. For example, file URL with path, and it takes a string. In our case, we just want the string to, pass a string and create the URL object. So you select this second to last option. And our string is this string itself. And this needs to be put in an if block. If this is successful, then do all this rest of the things. If the URL has a problem, it's not a valid URL, it won't go inside the if. Okay, now we have a URL object. What the next thing we are going to do is we are going to create the data task object. And that we do using URL session. If you look up the URL session documentation, you will see what all it does. And what we want to do is we want to create, URL session itself, we don't instantiate. It provides us a convenience object which itself contains called shared. Just like when we were trying to save the tic-tac-toe data, we used user defaults dot standard. We did not instantiate an object of user defaults class. We did user defaults dot standard dot set dot get. So that standard was a static object which is available for the application. I'm sorry, this should not happen. Okay, so in the same way, this provides us an object, a static object called shared. So that's what we'll use. And this within it has the data task. You can create data tasks using various, you could have a URL request object instead of URL. We have the URL, so we'll just say you create the data task with this URL object. Okay. So this will create a data task. Now, if you notice, how does this work? When you're making a network request, you're on the main thread. It's doing some execution, like you changed something on that wheel, right? It came here, and this is currency selection changed, right? So it comes to this function, update exchange rates, and this is where we are calling this network call. We'll make this network call to this URL. Now, what happens if this is going to take 5 minutes to return? Let's say you had a different kind of network call. You are downloading a movie, which takes 5 minutes to download. What do you want? You want the screen to freeze and the user to think that, okay, nothing is happening. No. That's why this happens asynchronously. So this happens on a separate thread and the execution goes back here. So it goes back to whatever it was doing. And if you were downloading a movie, you would display a message saying downloading the movie and maybe show a progress bar or allow the user to do other things while the movie is downloading in the background. In our case, we know it's not going to take that long, but still we have to make that call asynchronously. So while that is happening, this goes back. So what happens when it's complete? So when that request is fulfilled, what it will do is it will look for what is called the completion handler. So if you were downloading a movie, when the download is finished, that completion handler would get invoked. And then it will do whatever it needs to do, save the movie or display a message to the user saying, okay, the movie is downloaded, we want to watch it. So for all of that, you need a completion handler. Completion handler. And what this does is, it's on a separate thread. From here, it will tell the main thread that, okay, this job is complete, and here is the result. And the main thread will put it in its queue. So whatever is happening on the main thread, when its turn comes, it will either display a message or say, okay, this is complete. Let's save it, let's do something with it. So in our case, we need to add a completion handler which will say, okay, exchange rate is received, and it will tell the main thread, which is basically, it will go to the view controller and say, okay, here is the exchange rate. Now you can update the numbers on the screen. So while all of that, it just stays in the background. And to specify a completion handler, you need to basically create a block here. And if we were to go back and look at the documentation of URL session, and in it we want to see data task, adding data task to a session. So this would be the function call. The completion handler has this anatomy. It is invoked with the data, an object of type data, an object of type URL response, and an object of type error. Data object contains the actual response that we received from the server. URL response is an object that has other parameters related to the request. For example, the headers that may have been returned, what was the status code, etc. An error object, if there was an error, the request did not complete, maybe there is no internet, maybe the server had a problem. So this is what we will implement. We will need these three parameters. And the way the syntax for that is, we'll just put them here. And we'll embed the actual, whatever we want to do when it is finished in here. So the first thing we can do is we can print what we received. And it is a JSON string. So we'll create a string object from whatever we received. And actually it is a data object. So we will do string from data. This is our data, and the encoding, we are just going to assume that it is UTF-8. So UTF-8. So you just type .UTF-8. This will put whatever we received into a string, and we can print it to see what we received. Okay, what is this error now? Value of optional type data must be unwrapped. So it is possible, if the request was not successful, this data object that we receive may be null. So why don't we fix this? We'll say if we'll create a local variable called data received and put both of these statements in that block for now. What that does is it checks whether data object was nil or it had a value, and if it is not nil, then it goes inside, and in that case here we have to use data received. So understand what is happening here. We had the URL stored in a string. We created a URL object from it. Using that URL object, we opened a URL session and created a data task, which when complete will come here, and it will have these three arguments. The completion handler has these three arguments: the data, the response, and the error. So first thing we do is we check if the data received, if this data actually has a value, which we do by putting it in an if let. Whatever is inside is only executed when this data is not nil. That's what is happening here. Okay. Now, data task object by itself, it does not run. It is just created for here. If you see, we've just created the data task. We need to run it. Just creating it does not run it. And to run it, we need to call a method on it. So we'll say data task, and the method is actually called resume. So it's been initialized, it's waiting there to run. And as soon as we say resume, it will run this. If we don't say resume, it just doesn't do anything. It does not actually perform the API call. Okay, so if we run the app at this point, any changes we make to the currencies, we should see some output here. So this is what happened. Okay, convert from USD to CAD. This is the URL, and it actually did the execution, and it got this data back. This is the JSON string it received. So it is telling me that base is USD and the rate is 1.3066. So at this point, it did all of that. We created the URL, we created the connection, we asked the server for this exchange rate, and it came back to us as the JSON object. This is the line you're getting the error on? Yeah. So make sure if it looks like this, so these are the two strings from currency and to currency, and we are passing them. And to not have argument labels, you have underscore in front of them in the function declaration. Okay, how many of you are getting that JSON output in your debug? Okay, some people are. So we are getting this JSON string back, and now we want to parse it. We want to extract the information that we are interested in it. Right, so this is what we are getting. Now Swift has its own JSON framework. You can parse strings, but it has a problem. And to see that, search in your Safari, whatever browser you want to use, search for Swifty JSON. Search for this term. And this is a package on GitHub. The first link will be to GitHub. And you will be downloading this now, so it's best that you actually search for it and get it. So this is the explanation. Why is the typical JSON handling in Swift not good? So it says here the Swift is very strict about types, and type safety is, it can save us from mistakes. But when there are too many of those, it just makes the code very cumbersome. So for example, here, from the Twitter API, if you want to retrieve a user's name from a tweet, so if you talk to the Twitter API, just like we did to the currency exchange, it will return you a tweet in a JSON format. And now you want to find who was the user. This is what you have to do in Swift, native Swift. You will create an object using this JSON serialization. This is a Swift class. And you'll provide it the data just like we are parsing that data. And then you will say, okay, that whatever is received is in this format. So you need to know that it's an array of arrays, or actually it's a dictionary, string to any object. And then you will retrieve the user object from it and cast it as string any. And then you will say, okay, get me the name as string. And any of these could fail at any time. If your original JSON had some problem, it was not in this format, or if it had a syntax error, it would fail. If this did not conform to this, it will fail. If this was not a string, it was a number, it would fail. So this is how much you have to do. And then he says that it's okay, it's possible to reduce it a bit, but it is still quite messy. On the other hand, this package that we are on, it lets you do this. You create an object of this JSON class, which is created by this Swifty JSON package. And to get the username, you just say this. You don't have to do all these checks. This will return a nil. So it makes for a much easier code to read. That's what we'll do. We'll use this package to parse the JSON we are receiving. And how will we do that? How do we use it? So requirements, we'll meet all the requirements. So there are various ways we could install this, like Cocoa Pods. Do any of you know what Cocoa Pods are? Oh, it's not the pods to make coffee. It's do you know what Yes.
Like NPM packages. Like NPM packages.
Yes, they're like NPM packages, or maybe some of you have used Linux and you have used tools like Yum or apt. Anybody? Package managers, basically. They allow you to download packages which people have created. So Cocoa Pods is like that. Carthage is another framework that does something very similar. But the problem we have is I don't know what privileges your accounts give you on these machines. So I don't know if we start doing this, it will happen or not. So what we'll do is we'll use the simplest method. To use this library, you have to do this. So basically, just drag this one file to your project tree. So that's what we'll do here. We will download this. So go to the top of this page and download this as a zip. Okay. And once downloaded, you can open it from the downloads and go into the source folder and then the Swifty JSON folder, and you will see the Swift file. And we want to move it into our project. So make sure your project, the navigator is visible, and then just drag and drop this file into this area, your project. And when you drag and drop, it will ask you what you want to do. And in that window, you select this. You check, make sure this is checked, copy item. So it will actually make a copy of that file inside your project instead of making a reference to it. And this target should be selected. So once you have that, start over. Okay, so you download from here, you download it. And then in that downloaded file, zip file, when it it's unzipped, you will see a source folder and then swifty.json, and you need this file here, the swifty.json.swift. So drag and drop it into your project next to one of these files. And then you select this copy items if needed, and the target. This may come in checked, it may not. So you make sure you check it and then just say finish. And now you have the swifty.json package here that you can use. So let's use it. We'll go back to the model. And this JSON string that we have received, we are going to create a JSON object out of it. So if you type below that, just below the print statement, let JSON equal to JSON. This is the object that swifty.json gives us. We have the data object, right? We have the data object that we have received here, and that's what we want to use. So what is interesting is that here it tells us what this function call looks like. It says you can create, initialize a JSON object, but it says throws. Any idea what this throws is? Yes, Tuna. Yes, it can throw an error. So basically, when we are trying to create a JSON object, if there is a problem with the JSON, then it will throw an error, and we need to catch it. So in Java, what would you do if there was a possibility? Exception. If it can throw an exception, how would you implement it? Try catch. It's the same thing here, but the syntax is a bit different. So what happens is when something is able to throw, you put it in a do block. So you say do, and whatever function call can throw, you put a try in front of it. And now we will select this. And this is where we put our data received. Okay. And we close the do block. But since it can throw now, that's where we catch it. And we assign a variable name to whatever error is being thrown. And if in case there is an error, we can print it. Failed to create JSON object. And we can print the error. Okay, so this is what happens if it fails. If it does not fail, it will execute the rest of the code here. So we can get our exchange rate. We have the JSON object. What does it look like? It has a rates key, and within it there is a CAD key, or whatever the to currency was, and that is the value we want. So rates, and then the to currency. And this value here, as we can tell, it's a number and it's a double. So we have to specify that. We have to say here dot double. This will give us our exchange rate. Now, what happens if, let's say, the currency is not supported by the API? API has some limitations, or we have a typo in our currency name. It may return valid JSON with an error message. So this will think that, okay, the JSON is valid. It will try to get the double, but the double will return as new. So we'll do the same thing as we did before here with the data. We'll do the same thing here. We'll just say if. So if it returns a proper value, then do something. We'll do something with the exchange rate here. For now, let's just print it. Okay, I want to go from USD to CAD and I want to see the number here. So rate is this. It's telling me it's $1.30 today. Okay. So we have the rate now. We're getting the rate out of the JSON object. How do we send it back to the view controller? This is happening on a separate thread. Now we want to send it back to the view controller. See, return happens as soon as the call is invoked. Now this is on a different thread. So where does it return to? It has nowhere to return.
Save as a variable and pass the reference of the
So yes, so basically we can pass the view controller itself to this function call. And then when this completes, we'll say, okay, call this function in the view controller. And that it can do from a separate thread. So instead of, basically what is happening is here, it does not know that there is a view controller that it can talk to. So we first, require a view controller variable here. So this is what you do. Make sure you type a space after the underscore and then view controller. And its type is view controller. So we add an argument at the beginning itself. So it's got a view controller now. It knows about the view controller. Now, since we modified our function definition, we need to modify the function call. This is where we are calling it from. And this does not match the function definition anymore. This has only 2 arguments. Here it requires 3. So we'll add the third argument to the beginning, which is self, the self object, the view controller object itself. Okay, so at this point, so this is the change we made here. And in this model, we added this much. Okay, now we know that it has a view controller to go to, but view controller needs a method now that will act on this information. So the view controller needs to be set up to receive the new exchange rate. So we need a method in the view controller which will take in the exchange rate and put it in the right place. Let's implement that. I'm going to call it update conversion or update converted amount. And it's going to receive the exchange rate. It's a double. Where is this amount going? Right now, we just want to display the exchange rates. We assume that this is 1. We'll just put it in this box here for now. So we have an ID outlet to that. So we just change its text to this, whatever we are receiving. What is that outlet called? What did we name it? Which one of these? To amount. That's what we will change. Okay, so we'll say here to amount dot text is equal to, we can't just put exchange rate because it's a double, it's going to complain that you cannot assign value of type double to string. So we'll just instantiate a string out of it. And this function, now we have it, but we haven't yet called it. We need to call it from here. So once we have the exchange rate, we'll call this function from the view controller. So we have the view controller object. Make sure the one you choose from the options is this one with the small v, the object, not the class. Update conversion amount and the exchange rate. You pass it the exchange rate. Let's see what happens now. So when I change this to CAD to USD, I want to see that number changing from 1.0 to the actual rate. Okay, it did not because I have an error. It's telling me, what does it tell me? UI text field.text must be used from main thread only. So what happened is, in this completion handler, we call that function of the view controller to update the text field, change its text, right? And this is still on this thread. We can't do that because the main thread may be doing something else to the view. That view may have disappeared. Anything could have happened. That text field may not even be there. So this is not safe. So what we need to do is we need to embed this part, updating of text, in a dispatch queue for the main thread. So the main thread will deal with it. Just like when we were doing the tic-tac-toe, we wanted to animate those moves. We created, we put it in a dispatch and added a delay. Here we won't add a delay. We'll just put it in the dispatch queue. So for our purpose, all we have to do here right now is embed this into a dispatch queue. So basically you start typing dispatch queue and in the main thread. So dispatch queue.main and the first one, async. So this will be run asynchronously. So the main thread will do it when it gets its chance. So this code that we have below it, just cut and paste it in here. So that way what's happening now is this exchange rate, it comes here and it gets put on the dispatch queue of the main thread. So there is no problem. There are no conflicts if the main thread will deal with it. And what is this error? Reference to property enclosure requires explicit self dot. Because this is on a separate thread now, it wants you to use explicit notation. So just say fix and it will put a self dot. Let's see what happens now. I'll change this to USD and we are expecting to see 1.3 there. So there you go. There is your basic functionality is there now. If we change something else, change this to GBP, it should change again. Numbers look right to you? $1 is this much? Rupees? No? Oh, you can't see it? Is it too small? Well, that's as big as it will let me make this. So it's saying 68.86. Okay. What's wrong with this picture? Still not complete. From currency number can be edited. What else? the names from currency name and to currency name, both are missing. So we need to add those now. And we need to allow this number to be edited. So let's change the names first. So how do we do that? So just like here, this is where we have the list of currencies, right? We can have a variable called currency names, and it can be a dictionary which goes from string to string. And we can provide all the names here. So for example, CAD is whatever currencies we have, we can declare a name for them, and this name is what we'll use when we change that field, the label. This you can type all the names here. Indian rupee. How do you spell Omani Riyal? Is it RIYAL or they have a different spelling? Okay. So we've got the names in here now. I have a typo. Okay. How are we going to use them and where? What we will do is, this is where we come whenever there is a change. So right here we have the currency names. We can change the names from here. We'll just call, retrieve the value with the key from currency and to currency. And how do we do that? We need to assign it to the right outlet. So what are our outlet? I think it's called from currency name. From currency name dot text is equal to conversion model dot currency names. Save the file if it's not showing up here. Currency names, and then we use the from currency. And the same thing we'll do for the to currency name. This will update those two names. So basically, systematically, we are adding the functionality little by little. Okay, are you able to see, if you run this, are you able to see the change? How many of you are able to see the change, the currency name change? Error. What is the error? Okay. So if you are getting errors, your numbers are not updating, check the URL. So how about now we try to make that amount respond to changes. So for example, right now, if I were to say make this instead of 1, I make it 100, nothing happens. Okay, but if I go back somewhere and come back, it takes effect because now it is using 100. No, it's not yet. My mistake. We are just showing this. So what we want to do is now we want to make the code respond to changes in that field and actually use that amount, whatever is there. So how will we do that? So when we receive this exchange rate here, we are just displaying it. So what we can do is we can first of all retrieve the amount in that text field. From amount is our outlet, and I'm just going to get its text. Okay, so this gives me the text. And since I'm putting all of this in the dispatch queue, it will keep complaining. Just keep saying fix. Okay. Now this function, this retrieval of text, it can return nil, which we want to deal with. So we'll just say if this is happening, then go inside. And then we'll create a double out of it. Equal to, we'll initialize a double from a string. Basically, just say amount. We'll create an amount from the string. So if both of these are successful, meaning the number is actually a valid number, the string contains a valid number, the user hasn't typed something wrong there, then we will calculate what we need to show. So why don't we initialize it first? Let amount to show. And let's initialize it to the exchange rate. So in the worst case, we'll just show the exchange rate if there is a problem with the amount. And if all of these are okay, if the amount, there is a text in that field and it is a valid number, then we will calculate it. Amount to show is equal to amount number star exchange rate. So it will multiply that amount with the exchange rate. What's the complaint? Okay, cannot. So this I declared as a let constant, but we are changing it. So we need to fix that. Just click fix and it will get fixed. Okay, so we have this now. We have calculated it, we have updated it, and that's what we need to display instead of the exchange rate in this to amount field. So just change that to amount to show. So $1 is 1.3 Canadian. I'm going to change it to 10. And right now we are not listening to events on this field. So we just have to go somewhere else and come back. So it got multiplied by 10. It is showing $13. Okay, so we have added one more functionality, which is whatever the amount is here, as you change the currencies, it uses that. What we are still missing is as you are typing the number, it should keep changing. You should not have to do anything else. So to do that, we need to listen to some events on this. what you remember the calculator app? We did something like that there. As we were typing the numbers, we were building in the background the first variable, the second variable, and what was pressed inside. The same kind of thing we need to do here. That was a text field which was listening to some events. So if you go to your storyboard and click on this text field and go to this connections inspector, it will show you what are the events you can listen to, sent events. So we need to implement one or more of these. Which one do you think is there one? Editing? Changed. Perfect. If we implement editing changed method, it's basically while you're editing, something has changed. Any key has been pressed, this event will be triggered. So we can use that and recalculate. So add this here. So basically at the end of your class, before the last this view controller class, will bring that event listener here. So from here, editing changed. If you take your mouse on that circle, it turns into a plus. Bring it here and drop it here. So it is listening to editing changed, and we'll call it amount changed. Call that function amount changed and connect it. So now this function will be called anytime we change that number. As we are changing it, it will be called. And what do we need to do from here? So when it comes here, we know that the amount has changed. So we need to update the converted amount this side. And all of that is being done here, right? This is the code that does that. So if we just call this function from here, our job is done. But the problem is that we are not storing the exchange rate that it needs. So to be able to do that, we need to create a class variable for the exchange rate and keep track of it. So that's what we'll do. We'll create a variable called exchange rate here and assign it a default value of 1.0. So now what happens when this is called, we will store it. Self.exchange rate is equal to exchange rate. Added at the top. So we added to the top a declaration of a new variable called exchange rate, which is a class variable. And then when this function is called, update converted amount, and the new exchange rate is passed to it, we update the class variable. Can anybody explain to me what this syntax, why we did this? Self.exchange rate equal to exchange rate. In other words, simpler words, store it globally. So this, the one on the right hand side is the local variable which was passed to the function, and it happens to have the same name. We gave it the exact same name in the class. So if we want to change the class variable, we have to specify self.exchange rate. So now it is, see the colors are also different. It's lighter, whatever that color is. Exchange rate, self.exchange rate, it has a slightly different color here. So it's referring to a different, this is the class variable and this is the local. Okay, now that we are storing it from here, all we need to do is we can just say, invoke this function, update converted amount, and pass it the exchange rate. And that will add one more piece of the functionality, which is okay. Now I will change this. I'll make it 10.5. So now if you go somewhere, you go to the UK, your bill in the restaurant is £10, or let's say it is £15. You want to know how many Canadian dollars, you can just type it. So this takes us one step closer. Now I don't know if OMR is supported. So it's telling me here in the message OMR is not supported. So we have two options. One is to find an API that supports OMR or remove it from our list. Okay, so basically this is the way it is, and when the app starts, it shows CAD to CAD, but there is still something missing. This is the first screen, initial screen. It does not show the currency name. It just says from currency name to currency name. It should show Canadian dollar. It's selected. So we can fix that as well. And how do we do that? See, that is happening here. The names are being assigned in this function. We can just call this function. Or for example, you want to start. See, these are our initial indexes, right? From and 0. From and 2, they're both 0. So the way to do it is there are various ways. You could go to the storyboard and change the text here. You could call it Canadian dollar. That's one way of doing it. You just say here Canadian dollar, and then it will show up like that. But that's not the most elegant, because let's say you want to change the initial selection. Then you have to go to the storyboard and change that. So what we'll do is we'll call this function from in here. From where will we call it? From here, view did load. So just say picker view and it will give you the options, and we want this one, did select row. And our picker view is currency picker, and select row, we'll just say select the first row in the first component. So this is just like a dummy call. This is just so that it updates that field when we run it. So now when it initializes, it should show up properly. Yeah, Canadian dollar, Canadian dollar. You could, in fact, if you want, you could initialize it to some other pairing. You could say that this first one is USD, and then you can just change that here. So for example, if I wanted to do that, I would change this to 1. So the second element in the first wheel. And it not only does it initialize in the background, it did that function call, the API, the network call, everything got done, and we've got the value here. But this did not change. This is wrong. So if we want to do that, we have to call another function to change this, to select a different value. So what we'll do is, we'll not get into that right now. That's not a lot of value addition. So we'll just leave it as that. It will start as Canadian dollar, and let you choose. Yes. Isn't coming? So do you have this code? So if your currency name is not showing in your view controller, make sure you have this part. All right, guys. So that's all for today. For those of you who are done, you can leave. Those of you who are having difficulties, I will still be around for a few minutes.